Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andreas Massouras, and I'm the Director of Business Development at Saphetor. I'd like to welcome you today to our webinar examining the upcoming in vitro diagnostic regulation and its impact on the genetic testing lab. The webinar will last for about half an hour, after which we will open the floor for discussion. To submit your questions, please do so using the Q&A section on the Zoom navigation bar. If you need to leave at any point, please note that the webinar is recorded and will be shared via email after the session has concluded. We've prepared two talks today for you. In the first part, Andreas Massouras, the CEO of Saphetor, will cover the work and preparations we've been making to ensure our products remain fully compliant with regulation. In the second part, Rocha, the senior partner at Mediday Consulting, will provide an overview of what IVD means for software, lab-developed tests, and what needs to happen from a wet lab and software perspective to ensure a full IVDR compliance. Now, it's a great pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Andreas Massouras, the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Saphetor, the creator of the varsam.com knowledge base and global genomics community. Andreas has a proven track record in creating value from big data analysis with more than 10 years of experience in genomics. In the last 12 years, Andreas began a second career by becoming one of the pioneers in applying big data and computer science know-how to genetics. He received a PhD degree in Computational Genetics from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne in Switzerland, and software engineering degree from Imperial College in London. Andreas, I'm turning to you now.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and thanks for this nice introduction. Welcome from my side to everyone, all the members of the VarSome community. As Thomas said, and the subjects of this meeting is, I'm going to present the IVDR, the in vitro diagnostic regulation, and how it applies to our platform VarSome Clinical. But first, I will give you a bit of an overview of the different platforms that we offer. So I'm the CEO of Saphetor. Saphetor is, of course, a Swiss company behind all the VarSome platforms. And many of you, or if not all of you, are familiar with the free search engine and community called varsam.com, which is now used globally by more than 300,000 users. We believe it to be the largest global human genomics community. But we also offer a number of other products or platforms, namely VarSome Clinical, which is the fully fledged platform processing NGS data. And this is the subject of today's talk, as well as VarSome Premium, which is a subscription service with additional data on top of VarSome, a VarSome API, which is a tool for bioinformaticians to use our annotation and interpretation capabilities, as well as VarSome Insights, which is a tool for connecting patients with clinical trials. So at Saphetor, our mission is to enable anyone to find, share, and use the most comprehensive human genome data and to collaborate to improve health and lives around the world. And this is very much in line with the in vitro diagnostic regulation, because its aim is, of course, to protect patients and provide patients with the most accurate possible molecular diagnosis. So it is clear to us, and it should be clear to all, that our mission is entirely aligned and consistent with the IVDR, and we embrace IVDR and we welcome it, as it will undoubtedly improve the diagnosis for patients in Europe and beyond. So in our company, we have put together a number of teams to perform different tasks, and in relation to IVDR, obviously this is in charge, the regulatory affairs team is in charge of our compliance with IVDR, but of course everyone else is also involved, such as our bioinformatics team, who generally implement the tools and pipelines for analysis of NGS data. And in this case, they are in charge of the validation, a very important part. We have a number of teams looking after our various platforms, as I showed you earlier. We have obviously a team to perform analysis and quality, testing and quality assurance, and that's also an incredibly important task. And we closely collaborate with Mediday, for which the second speaker, Rocha, is going to talk after me, and is a team of regulatory affairs and quality assurance experts. So we have established a number of procedures, stringent procedures for our compliance with IVDR, and in particular that all our code we develop, all software we develop is reviewed and approved before we deploy it. We have a series of automated unit and integration tests. That's literally hundreds and hundreds of tests that we perform before any release. And this is, for example, next week we are planning a major release in our all our platforms, and now we are very busy following these unit and integration tests and creating new ones as needed, as well as manual tests. We perform risk analysis regularly and post-implementation reviews. And last but not least, we get an amazing amount of constructive feedback from the global VarSome community, which consists, as I mentioned, from more than 300,000 users from all research and medical fields, who provide us with incredibly valuable feedback and hold us to a very high standard. So we have obtained a number of certifications. For example, the ISO for quality for medical device, quality management system for medical devices, the ISO for information security, and specifically another certification for medical device software. And importantly, we currently have certified VarSome Clinical with the CE IVD mark. And there is a white paper which will be made available to you, which describes our compliance and certification effort. So VarSome Clinical, as I mentioned, is the topic of this presentation. It's a fully fledged platform handling data from either raw reads, as in FASTQ files, or from VCF files, in other words, variants that have already been called. And it provides a myriad of features and functions associated with a diagnostic process to support a diagnostic process, including advanced filtering and, of course, providing a wealth of information about each variant that you find. And we are more than happy to arrange for a demonstration of this product if you wish. So under IVDR, VarSome Clinical is considered a Class C diagnostic medical device. And Kim will elaborate of what this means, but it generally means that it's considered a medium to high risk medical device, and therefore it's subject to far more stringent regulation than any such software was previously subject to. And VarSome Clinical is a diagnostic decision support tool. that performs variant discovery for different kinds of variants, including single nucleotide variants, indels, and copy number variants. Annotation with 120 different data resources. Many of them are also available on the free VarSome search engine, but some aren't. And especially some licensed data is available on VarSome Clinical, but not on VarSome. We have developed an AI tool, artificial intelligence tool that automatically links publications in medical and research literature, and we are actually releasing it piece by piece. There will be a major upgrade coming up next week. And we offer advanced algorithmic filtering to help quickly locate the causative variant in any diagnostic sample. And of course, we provide automated interpretation of variants according to the ACMG and AMP guidelines for both germline and somatic variants of all the above types, so meaning single nucleotide variants, indels, and copy number variants. So our process towards IVDR is moving ahead at a good pace. We have fully adapted our software development process to IVDR. We are now completing the technical documentation and the formalization of the validation process for variant discovery, annotation, and interpretation, and will be ready for the conformity assessment before the end of this year. The conformity assessment will happen in practice as soon as the notified body is available and capable of performing this conformity assessment. So the precise timing is not yet known. In terms of validation, we evaluate the performance of our tools against well-established data sets, as you can see on the slide. And there's another white paper that outlines our validation program. And according to our validation policy that is going to be implemented with IVDR, we aim to validate every assay used by every laboratory. And although this is actually not required, we don't require a prior validation for the use of VarSome Clinical. However, if these assays are used for diagnostic purposes, and in order to comply with IVDR, a validation will be required for all assays. And this aims at improving the reliability of genetic testing in general. So that's me. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my talk. We will move on to Kim's presentation now, but we will take then questions at the end. But of course, at any time, feel free to ask questions on the chat. Thank you very much. Kim, over to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Andreas, for your nice introduction. Now I'd like to hand over to our second speaker, Kim Rocha, who is a senior partner at Mediday. Kim is an experienced project manager for multinational and multicultural environments across the US and Europe. He has a successful track record in QMS implementation, driving risk management activities, auditing for medical device manufacturing, and in the CE marking process, including technical file compilation and validation activities for products and processes. Kim holds an MBA in Information System Security, a bachelor degree in Economy, in Project Management, and in MedTech Venture Management. Kim combines medical device experience with a proven experience in supply chain optimization and implementation of good practices. Kim, it's a great pleasure to have you today with us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It's my great pleasure to have the chance to have some words about the new in vitro diagnostic regulation. I prepared a few slides to try to convey the key points to be addressed. Maybe just a quick word about Mediday. So Mediday is a consulting company, and our main mission is to support medical device manufacturers to achieve compliance with the regulation. So we support them in addressing quality assurance issue with our quality management system, regulatory affairs, so basically getting access to the market, supporting with clinical validation, and we also focusing on all digital aspect. As we can see, we have more and more software which are part of the medical device area. The in vitro diagnostic regulation is within a crowded area of regulatory context. I mean, when you're willing to comply with the regulation, of course, there is multiple aspects that you have to take into consideration. You have, of course, the regulation, you have guidances, you have good practices, and so on and so forth. And then you also have to consider the particular aspect related to specific countries. Typically, when you're talking about medical devices in general, or in vitro diagnostic general devices, it is regulated at high level, typically European Union, US, etc. And then you may have a specific aspect related to genetics, which might be related at the national level. So the context might be quite cumbersome. The idea of today is to have a focus on one of the regulation that is affecting significantly the manufacturers in the coming years. And this legislation is the new in vitro diagnostic device regulation. Maybe just before talking precisely about this in vitro diagnostic regulation, I just want to make a little pass by the CE mark. So you may know CE mark already, because when you look at your computer, when you look at your phone, when you look at many goods that are circulating in Europe, you have this little CE logo, the CE mark, which is stamped on the product. So basically, this CE mark means that the product is actually complying with the requirements of a given European regulation. So you will find typically this CE mark on multiple type of devices, and of course on medical devices and in vitro diagnostic devices. The CE mark is actually not a guarantee of quality, it's actually a guarantee that you comply with the legislation. So basically, to be able to affix the CE mark on your product, you need to ensure that you comply with the legislation. And normally it's a legislation that is going to define the level of quality which is expected. So basically the level of performance, the level of safety that needs to be associated with a product. So when you buy a device, you want to check in Europe that there is a CE mark on this product, because that would mean that this product is compliant with the established regulation. The CE marking is not, it's the consequences of a whole process. So it's basically the manufacturers who declare that the product is compliant with the product. So it's not just something that you can affix like this. You need to go through the whole process, which usually includes the demonstration of the safety and performance. And this is particularly the case for the medical devices, as we will see in the coming slides. You cannot really affix a CE mark for commercial purpose. It's not a marketing tool. It's really a purpose to demonstrating the notion of compliance. So of course, you cannot just affix the CE mark on your product. That would be wrong. That would not be legal if you actually affix the CE mark without having accomplished the complete conformity assessment process. Why do we have a new regulation? This is a question that we can have. I mean, we have a current regulation on medical devices and on in vitro diagnostic devices that is in place for almost 30 years. The main reason is that, for those of you who may recall that in 2014 or a little bit before, we had a scandal in Europe, which was related to an implant, a breast implant, which was called the PIP scandal. And this PIP scandal created a kind of thunderstorm in Europe that pushed the regulator to revise and to update the regulation. And it's really important to keep in mind that we are changing the regulation, that the regulation is more demanding, it's bringing higher scrutiny on the medical device manufacturers, because at the time of those regulations were discussed, or what the trigger of this regulation is basically the loss of confidence in medical devices. So we basically have this regulation as a consequences of a scandal that happened in Europe, or maybe multiple scandals to some extent, but this one is basically the top of the iceberg. And basically the European Commission and the European Parliament decided that they needed to significantly reinforce the medical device regulation in order to ensure that the product placed on the market were safe and performing. Whether we really had an issue in the past, it's another discussion, but it's important to understand where we are going, to also understand where it started. And it started with the idea of restoring confidence. So of course, the fact that there is higher requirement at this stage, it's not really surprising. What is interesting with this regulation, or what is maybe the key point that everyone has to keep in mind? I use the word of William Deming. So for those of you who know, William Deming is actually the father of the quality. I think that was in the 50s. So it's the gentleman who developed the concept of plan, do, check, act. So basically this wheel that you often see in the quality management training and classes. And he said, basically, in God we trust, all other bring data. I will let you make your own choice about the first part of the sentence, but what is clearly sure is that the all other bring data is the main principle of the new regulation. I mean, up to now, we had the chance to be able to market product, to market medicinal product, well, medical devices, in vitro diagnostic devices, where we would actually rely a lot on good practices and how things were implemented and experience and so on and so forth. From this new regulation, there is one cornerstone, is that you need to demonstrate safety and performance of your device with evidence. So you need to bring data to the table. You need to be able to demonstrate that your product is effectively safe and it's effectively performing as expected. So if you start to make a claim on your product to say, my product is able to do this, my able is able to diagnostic that, and so on and so forth, it means that you must have the data to support that. And when we're talking about data, it's just not a couple of data collected somewhere. It's really to have significant and statistically significant data in order to be able to support the claim. So this is probably one of the fundamental change that we have, is that the level of expectation towards scientific data has significantly raised with this new regulation. In terms of change, also to give you an idea, I know that showing the number of pages is not the best way to demonstrate the quality of a document. We all went to school and all asked the number of pages, and we were told that it's not the number of pages that define the quality. But what we can see is that the previous regulation, so the IVD directive, was containing 37 pages, and the new IVDR, so the new regulation, is basically counting almost 160 pages, so roughly 4 times the number of requirement and so on and so forth. Not everything is new. A lot of things were already existing in the previous context, but a lot of things have been formalized and included in the law, in the regulation, which now make it absolutely mandatory. So of course, we have a broader set of requirements that needs to be taken into consideration, hence a higher effort for compliance. Maybe just a little passage to the definition. When we look at the regulation, it's always important to see what is actually being regulated. And if you're wondering if you have in hand is actually new in vitro diagnostic medical devices, you need to basically check if you have if your product is actually fulfilling the definition. And it's important to keep in mind that the IVD is not just a test, per se, a physical test with an assay and so on and so forth. It can be a method, it can be a software, it can be a different item that would compose a complete method. So if we look at the basics of the definition, what do we see? We see that the first thing of a medical device is the intent used by the manufacturer. So actually it's what the manufacturer says that really counts, not really what the user is doing, but what the manufacturer says is the basis. And then if we look, what is the principle is that you have a software, you have a tool, you have a method that is actually used for in vitro examination of specimen for the purpose of providing information on different physiological and pathological state and so on and so forth. So if you actually have in hand a tools, a method, a software, piece of equipment that is basically doing this function, or you willing to use it for this function, or you are design and implement it for this function, then it's very likely that you are confronted to an in vitro diagnostic medical devices and that you have to comply with the existing regulation. In terms of timeline, the whole changes started in May 2017 with the entry into force. That's quite some time ago because the whole system had to evolve, especially at the notified body level. So the notified body level, the notified bodies are those companies that are performing the conformity assessment process. So they are basically checking if what you have established is valid or not, and actually delivering the CE mark at the end. So we started in May 2017, some time passed, and now we're in June 21. So basically, we are a little bit less than the entry into force, which will be the entry into application, which will be May 2022. At that date, basically, the current we won't be able to place any new devices according to the previous legal framework. All devices placed on the market after this date will have to comply with the new regulation. Then we will have a transition period where basically the product which are already on the market can remain on the market under the previous condition. But at May 26, 2024, all IVD will have to be updated to the new regulation. And as you will see after, if you have a device which is on the market already, you will anyway have to go through again the whole certification process for your devices. And then we have one more year for the product which have been placed already on the market. They can remain on the market for one more year, typically to empty stocks and so on and so forth. There will be a little grace period. The grace period is typically this time where you, for those who have put their device on the market, that's the time that they have, so until 2024, to complete the transition to IVDR. So to some extent here, if we look Saphetor is targeting to already make the transition at 2022, which is in the first group, basically, of people willing to make the change. And of course, there is a longer period to go up to 2024. Here, there is an important statement, is that you shouldn't wait until 2024 to change, because as there will be change in classification, there will be a need for notified bodies, and the number of notified bodies willing to or being able to make the assessment are not so many, and we expect that there will be limited resources to be able to do this transition. So the best advice of the day is probably not wait too long before you really start considering the process if you haven't done so far. In terms of changes, it will be a bit challenging to depict all the changes in 20 minutes roughly. But to make it short, I would say the key principle is that you will have to establish a technical documentation. The principle, the notion of non-grandfathering means that if you already have your product in the market, it doesn't mean that you don't have to make a change. So all product on the market will have to be recertified. So all product in Europe by 2024 will have a new certification. The classification system will evolve. So we have a new classification system. So typically moving from one system to another, I come back to that after. We have a performance evaluation, which will be necessary. So that's basically the demonstration of the safety and performance through a formalized report. Performance study will be much more numerous because, as I mentioned in introduction, data will be is the cornerstone of this new regulation. So we will need to collect more data. So we will see more and more performance study to demonstrate the effectiveness of these devices. We now have also the obligation to have someone which is a person responsible for regulatory compliance. So within the company, you actually have medical devices, you will have to nominate someone who will take this role, which will be the person responsible to respond for regulatory compliance, typically towards authorities. New specific rule for software, I come to that after. And then a post-market surveillance will be an activity. So basically to collect the expertise and experience established on the market. Last and not least, maybe for many of you or some of you, there is specific rules for health institution. So if you are a lab typically related to a health institution, there is specific rules that you may consider that could ease your way to compliance. Change in classification, what we see basically is that in the past, on the left-hand side of the slide, we would see that list A, list B was specific type of tests which were regulated. We have the cell test, and then we have all the others which were not basically regulated or were low class. So we had 80% of the devices which were considered as low level of scrutiny. In the new classification, the one that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, you actually have now rules for classification. So you have characteristic. If you look, for instance, rule 3, you see that you have genetic testing. So that's basically what VarSome Clinical is contributing to. And that's the reason why we end up with a class C. So you can see that you have a significant change in terms of classification for devices. Most of the device now, it's more 80% of the device that are in higher risk group, because the regulator wanted to have a more stringent regulatory context. So we have a change in classification, meaning devices in the past which were having a low or low regulation or low level of compliance to regulation now move to a higher risk class, and then having a higher expectation for compliance. In terms of implication, what it means that if your product remains a class A, so low level of expected compliance, or let's say requirements, then you don't need to have a notified body involved. And then if you are in the higher group, B, C, or D, then you definitely need to have a notified body involved. So again, an external company which is accredited by its national state that will review your technical documentation, review your quality management system, and basically confirm that your device is performing as expected and is safe. One of the other points which is important, as mentioned with the notion of data, every in vitro diagnostic device placed on the market will have to demonstrate the safety and performance, and that will be through 3 main parameters, which is a demonstration of the scientific validity. So basically, when I'm using an analyte to make a judgment or a diagnostic, is there a real link between the parameters? Then the analytical performance will have to be validated. So basically, am I really able to measure this analyte in terms of specificity and sensitivity? So basically the technical performance of the product. Then you will have to demonstrate the clinical performance. So basically, when I'm measuring this information, am I really able to use that information in order to bring that to clinic and to make a diagnostic? So you have this different level of validation that are expected. And then you will have to implement a post-market follow-up process in order to continuously capture new data and to update your existing analysis. So the regulation has changed in the way that now you basically constantly have to monitor the performance of your product on those different dimensions in order to ensure safety and performance of the product. To give you a quick overview of what it means that typically if you're working with established and standardized tests, well, you won't have so much effort because scientific validity is well known in the literature. Analytical performance is already standardized, so we basically know how to achieve it. Clinical performance is more related to the implementation. But if you're working with new product, then you see that you will have much more effort to establish the safety and the performance of your product, because you will have to demonstrate first the validity, scientific validity, then the analytical performance, and finally the clinical performance. So there is a whole domain here that will have to be addressed, which was common from some of the product already on the market, of course, but it's new for a large number of them as well. Last aspect I wanted to share with you today is related to medical device software. What we see is that we have more and more software being used in labs and provided as medical devices on the market. And of course, the question that we have is to say, okay, do I have a medical device when I have a software? So I have software everywhere, but when do I have a software? This is the first question that one may ask. And here, the way to address this question, there is a guidance, a free guidance that is established by the European Union. It's MDCG 2019-11. If you Google that, you will find this document. And basically, this guidance is giving you a decision tree to decide if your software is a medical device or not. In short, what we can say is that if the software is incorporated in medical device, that will be a medical device. If the software is performing an action on data which is different from storage, archival, lossless compression, communication, or simple search, it might be a medical device. So that's one of the contributing factors. Am I processing data? The other question is the action for the benefit of individual patient? So if I'm dealing with a cohort, or if I'm dealing with an individual patient, if it's a cohort, it might not be. If it's an individual patient, it's likely to be. And then, of course, is the action of the software aligned with the definition of the medical device or the in vitro diagnostic device that we have seen that makes it a medical device software. So at the end, if your software is having this kind of words related to the processing of data, so amplifying, evaluating, converting, correlating, etc., you're very likely to have a medical device in hand, and then you need to consider how to comply with the regulation. If we take an example to make it quite direct, I mean, if we look at VarSome Clinical, I mean, it offers a clinician fast and accurate solution to aid in making an informed decision diagnosis and on the selection of best therapies for a different type. We see also that this data is mainly provided by IVD themselves, which is one of the contributing factor to the definition of the IVD software device. What we see is that, do we have actually a software, a medical device software? The first answer is yes, actually, because I'm processing data for the benefit of individual patient with the objective to provide diagnostic. Is this data obtained mainly from IVD? In theory, yes, because normally the device that you would use to collect data for doing diagnostics should be IVD. What we see is that we still have laboratory equipment being used outside the intent use, but at the end we have IVD data which are being collected and used for this kind of process. And is the intent purpose driven mainly by IVD data? Yes, because at the end we're willing to make a diagnostic. So here we see we have a medical device software which qualify as a medical device, and more specifically as an IVD, hence the reason of the compliance of Saphetor or VarSome Clinical with the regulation. In terms of consequences, what we have seen, or what we have to ensure when you are in this situation, you need to ensure the compliance with the law. So basically the general safety and performance requirement. That's what you will find in the regulation, in the first annex of the regulation. You will have to implement a quality management system. So basically to ensure that the process that you have implemented are performed in a systematic way. You have to prepare a technical file for every of your products. You will have to do a performance evaluation. So basically what we have described before, and go through a conformity assessment process. So that's the four main steps that we have to conduct to establish and to comply with the regulation. Finally, my last point is related to the Article 5. I know that there is many of you attending this webinar coming also from lab. It's quite interesting if you have an accreditation with the standard EN ISO 15189 and you are actually linked to or considered as a health institution, then it's very likely that you don't need to do the conformity assessment process. You have to do all the rest. So all the activities that I depicted in the previous slide still need to be done. So there is no free lunch here, but at least you don't need to have the conformity assessment process. Thus, if you do that, what we have observed is that many countries, typically Switzerland, but others have implemented the obligation to make a notification to the national competent authority to signal the fact that you're operating medical devices. That was in a nutshell what I wanted to share with you. I hope that was useful. As a takeaway message, I would say that what you can do out of this presentation basically is, if you're wondering if you're confronted to medical devices or IVD, in vitro diagnostic devices, you should basically check the method tools that you're using and you have implemented to check with the definition if they qualify as IVD. You should check if this object actually, what is the level and the qualification, the class A, B, C, or D. Then you need to define what data you have to demonstrate their performance. If you don't have enough data, then you need to collect data in a formal way, so typically through performance study. Then you need to do a technical documentation, including the result of your evaluation. You need to implement a quality management system. and check if you qualify for Article 5. Otherwise, you need to initiate conformity assessment process with a notified body. So that can be quite an interesting journey that you have ahead of you if you haven't started already this process with your devices. Thank you very much for your attention, and I get back to Thomas for the question.
Thank you, Kim. That's been a fantastic talk. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and with the audience. Now, indeed, I'd like to open the floor for discussion. So I'm now going to review the questions from the audience here. So there is one question for you, Kim. I believe most of the questions actually seem to be for you. So let me start with the first one from Dr. Raymond Dalgleish. He's asking in which countries actually the IVDR regulation apply. In addition to that, I'd like to actually ask whether it also applies, to Switzerland, and also in which other countries outside the EU region, such as the UK, are likely to adopt something similar to IVDR.
So the European regulation is indeed the European regulation that apply first to the 27 countries that are within the European Union, but it also applies to a neighboring country like Norway and others that have actually established recognition, what we call mutual recognition acts. So basically the regulation of these countries are the same with regard to this particular aspect with the European one. You also have countries like Australia that are working with an MRA. So you still need to go for registration with the TGA, so the Australian Competent Authority, but it will be on the same type of information and the same type of documentation. So once you have actually established the IVD, you of course IVDR compliance to IVDR, your CE mark. Of course, you will be able to market in the 27 European countries. You won't be able to market in the UK. I mean, you need to have a UK mark. So you will have to go through a British notified body to make the assessment, but it will be on the similar basis as the IVDR. So it's a very good start actually to start compliance worldwide, because many countries are aligned or recognize the IVD, the CE mark, basically.
All right, thank you. Another question comes from Dr. McMananzi. It is a question about the technical file, technical documentation, and whether there is a specific requirement for the technical documentation actually in terms of analytical validation and the clinical studies. And I'd like to ask also, in addition to that, whether the technical documentation shall be available in all languages of countries where the product actually or service is commercialized.
So the first question, as a high-level requirement, you will find in the Annex 2 and the Annex 3 of the regulation the expectation in terms of documentation. Then the way European Commission has defined the level of expectation is through guidances. So if you type MDCG guidances on Google, you will end up on various type of guidance, typically guidance on performance evaluation, guidance on labeling, guidance on clinical investigation, and so on and so forth. So you will find more precise requirement through these guidances. In terms of language, in theory, you can set up your documentation in any language of the European Union. That won't really fly at the end of the day, because you can be challenged by any competent authority. What we recommend and the way we work is to do everything systematically in English. It should be done in English because also if you start to export your product to the US or other country, English is going to be recognized, whether other European language might not be recognized. Keep in mind that your labeling, which is something different, so the way you make your instruction for use, or maybe what might be with the packaging of your product, needs to be in the language of the country where it's marketed. So if you decide to market your product in Czechia, for instance, then you will have to ensure that the language, the national language, is being covered.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Another question from Dr. Forsblom. Whether and if actually certain health institutions can be exempted from IVDR regulations. If so, under which rules?
So the first answer is no. So the IVD regulation apply to every manufacturer. So the first question in the lab is, are you qualified? Are you developing, manufacturing what is considered as a medical device, respectively an in vitro diagnostic device? If it's the case and this product is being used only in-house for your own use, so basically for the services within the health institution, you may invoke Article 5. And the Article 5 is actually giving you a way out of going through the conformity assessment, meaning you don't need a notified body to come and verify what you have implemented, but you still have to comply with the general safety and performance requirement, which are in Annex 1 of the IVDR. So you still have to do everything, technical documentation, quality management, demonstration of safety and performance through performance study, collecting the necessary data and so on. But you don't need to have this work checked as would have as another manufacturer. But you need to be an accredited lab to have this way out.
All right.
Sorry, maybe just one last point. To have really precise condition on how to invoke this article, you can refer this condition. You can refer to Article 5 of the IVDR, and the IVDR is available for free if you look at it on your search engine. So that's the best way to basically look, and you will have the list of all the conditions that you have to fulfill in order to invoke this particular track.
I think there's a follow-up question on the language aspects from Dr. Martina Fabi. And this is again about whether the user manual actually is going to be in the language of the country. And what about user interfaces, for example? Should also user interfaces be translated into corresponding languages? So
the notion of languages is actually left to the choice of the member state of the European Union. So some countries will actually require that the user interface, the labeling in general, which include the user interface, and if we include also the user manual, shall be either in the national language as a general rule, no matter who the user is. And in some countries, you will have the fact that English is acceptable and sufficient if the user is professional user. So typically, if you have a tool that is designed to be used by a health professional, then some country will accept that the user interface, the user manual, the labeling is only in English. And that will vary country from country. Typically, if you take the example of Switzerland, if you take the example of Germany, if you take example of the Scandinavian country, and you're making an IVD for professional use, having the user interface in English will be actually sufficient.
Let me review the other questions. Kim, considering the scope and complexity of the IVDR requirements, what's the actually realistic timeline for getting the IVDR certification done? Are we talking about months or half a year or a year-long process?
So there is multiple factors that contribute to the timeline. The first one is the data that you have at hand. If you have a good quality of data, sufficient data to demonstrate safety or performance, that's a very positive factor. If you don't have data, it may take months to collect this data because you have to set up a performance study and to collect this data. The other parameters which will take time is basically being able to establish a relation with notified body. Notified body are completely overloaded due to this change of regulation. If you need a notified body, then you really have to start to enter into business relationship with a notified body. Otherwise, you might simply be waiting in the queue. And then it will depend on the ability to implement the processes, typically for a quality management process. So the duration of a project always depends on the resources and what needs to be achieved. So of course it depends on the resources, but I think below 1 year is probably more than optimistic, close to unrealistic. So for those who need to comply by 2022 or want to put their market under their device on the market under the previous legislation and benefit from the grace period, you really have a short time to start to be ready in 2022.
I have here probably a closing question for Andreas. Andreas, you've been involved in the field of clinical genetics and the bioinformatics for almost 10 years. What are your thoughts on the IVDR regulation? Do you see it as something overly positive or overly bureaucratic, or do you see it do you think is it like a natural part of how the field it's maturing?
Well, thank you for the question, Thomas. I think the IVDR is a sign of coming of age of our industry. So when it comes to genetic testing, this is a relatively new industry that has formed in the last few years. And we have witnessed a huge variety of standards and methods deployed in performing genetic tests. And this is, of course, has been a good start, but just a start. And when such an industry effectively comes of age, this means that there's much more standardization. Uniform standards are applied throughout the industry, which in the end is to the benefit of patients, because the patients can trust that wherever they go and do perform, in this case, a genetic test, that they're going to have results of at least a minimum quality that are guaranteed. And that cannot be but very positive. It can only be a positive development in our industry, and where it basically steps into the next phase of effectively industrializing genetic testing. So, but industrializing meaning that a lot more patients can benefit from this amazing technology, right? So currently, as we all know, only a small fraction of those patients who can benefit from NGS testing do so. And this is clearly, it's up to us to make it a scalable, making genetic tests scalable for the benefit of society, right? And having and winning the trust of society in those genetic tests is a very important step. And of course, IVDR goes a long way towards winning this trust, and so that we can actually do our job and use this technology to benefit as many people as possible.
Thank you so much, Andreas, for your insights here. So I see we are unfortunately we have run out of time for our talk today, for our session. Thank you very much, Kim, for your insights here. Andreas, also thank you for your participation. And first of all, thank you, the audience, for being today here with us. As I mentioned before, the webinar has been recorded, and we will share it with you over email right after the webinar. So thank you very much for your attention, and have a good day, and have a good weekend as well.
Thanks to all. Bye-bye.